Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? A while back, I picked up a vintage cassette Walkman, specifically a Sony WM-R202 from 1987. It needed a bit of work to get going again, but it's in good shape now. And while I'd like to listen to cassettes more often, I actually don't really want to use this Walkman. Really, it comes down to its condition. This unit is practically flawless cosmetically, and I'd hate to risk damaging it if I carried it around. I also have concerns about its battery compartment. Like a lot of cassette players from the time, the AA battery it uses fits into a separate caddy that clips to the bottom. While the body of the R202 is metal, the caddy is plastic, and if there's anything I've learned from working with vintage electronics, it's that plastic gets brittle over time. If these little tabs break off, the battery caddy would be useless, and good luck finding another one. Now, after buying the R202, I thought about all this and picked up what I figured would make for a decent alternative, a Sony WM-EX10 from 1991. It's a decidedly lower-end, all-plastic player, but it was cheap, and it worked just fine when I got it. But not long ago, I went to put a tape in it, heard a crack, and, well, now the cassette door won't stay closed. Yeah, brittle plastic. While scrolling through listings one evening, I stumbled on this Walkman, a WM-EX606 from 1993. I love this teal color, but not the price. I don't listen to tapes often enough to justify this kind of cost. But it got me thinking about that model specifically, and one day on eBay I found a black version that was being sold for parts or repairs with the description that it was untested. I put in a bid and, to my surprise, ended up winning the auction for its starting price of $12 US. I kind of wondered why nobody else bid on it, but didn't think too much further beyond that. When it arrived, it looked like it was going to be the perfect option for me. The body is all metal and feels really solid and high quality. There are soft touch controls with auto reverse, Dolby noise reduction, and it even has a 2-stage bass boost feature, which Sony strangely didn't give its classic Mega Bass branding. But it also has obvious signs of wear, scratches, and pitting in its finish, which meant I didn't have to worry about keeping it looking pristine. I could simply use it. While this model could use an external AA battery caddy, mine didn't come with one. Instead, you could use a so-called gum stick battery right inside the unit, which are taller and wider than a AA, but much thinner. They're rechargeable and use nickel metal hydride chemistry, so they're actually not too far off from a modern Eneloop battery. I dropped in a tape along with a fully charged gum stick to see what worked on the player and what didn't. And it turned out that nothing worked on the player. Even after flipping the hold switch several times in case it wasn't making good contact, the player was just dead. So it was time to take a peek inside to see what might be going on. The screws around the back cover are very small, and what's more, they aren't all the same size. In this situation, I like to draw a quick sketch showing where they came from, then tape the screws to those locations to keep them from getting lost. When I lifted the back cover off, this spring popped out all of a sudden. That didn't seem right, and there's one on the other side that's still tucked in as it should be. So I guess that's the first thing to put on the list to fix. The belt that drives the pulleys was also clearly bad, which is incredibly common with older cassette players. I pretty much expected to see this. I wanted to investigate why it didn't power on, so I decided to start by examining the battery terminals. They're on the back side of the circuit board, and I got this small ribbon cable disconnected first. It's what provides the audio signal from the tape head. Then I could remove the screws holding the board to the chassis and carefully flip it over. There are 2 other ribbon cables with soldered connections I didn't want to damage. And right away I think I found the problem. These negative battery terminals are really corroded. Someone probably left a gum stick in here that leaked. This corrosion is enough to prevent electrical contact, so I used a cotton swab soaked in vinegar to help clean it up. Usually this takes care of it, but I used a small piece of fine sandpaper wrapped around a spudger to finish cleaning off the terminals. Next, I tackled that belt. I had ordered a replacement right after winning the auction for the Walkman, since I figured I'd need it. There's actually a whole cottage industry that's popped up for replacement vintage audio parts, especially belts, and it's great to have newly made parts as an option. The old one came off mostly in big pieces. When these belts go bad, they turn to sticky goo that's a massive pain to clean up, so I'm thankful I didn't have much of that to deal with this time. I went around the pulleys with a swab soaked in isopropyl alcohol just to clean up any residue, then I could install the new belt. It fit perfectly and the gears moved smoothly when I turned one of the pulleys. So I figured it was good enough at that point to test and flip the circuit board back into place. Something that was called out in the Walkman service manual was to make sure this switch lines up with the lever it fits into. And it's a good thing I checked because they had gotten out of alignment when I took the board out. Thankfully, Sony included a slot in the PCB that you could stick a spudger through to move the switch. These devices are tiny and complex, but it's small touches like this that make it clear their engineers were keeping repairability in mind. That spring sticking out of the side was getting in the way, so I tucked it back where it belonged using a pair of tweezers. This was a fiddly process and took way longer than it should have, but I eventually got it. Then I could put the board's screws back in. The tolerances inside this Walkman are very tight, and I didn't want to risk something snagging on the new belt. While it generally looked okay, I cleaned the positive battery terminal anyway, and finally got that little flat flex reconnected. So I put the battery back in and dug out a test tape that I knew had audio on it. Sony marked the button functions in the silkscreen of their flex ribbon, so I pressed play, and yeah, it started playing the tape. Everything seemed to be working great so far. The pulleys were turning smoothly and quietly. I love watching mechanisms like this work. The precision required to make them operate reliably, especially when the device is frequently thrown in a bag or stuffed in a pocket. Well, sometimes it's more amazing than what modern solid-state technology is capable of. We take durability for granted these days. With the power and belt problems solved, I put the back cover on and started getting the screws reinstalled. But while checking the operation of the controls, I found that the Dolby switch was sliding freely. I took the cover off and was disappointed with what I saw. The stem for that switch had broken off. This was also a bit confusing. The exterior switch sliders have this funnel shape in the plastic so that they automatically align with the stem when the case goes on. I'm not sure how I broke it, but apparently I did, so I had to do something about it. Sure would be nice if I could have a project go right for once. I sanded down a small piece of plastic, cut it down to size, then dabbed the end with super glue while holding it in a pair of tweezers. It was very frustrating to get it to stick to what was left of the switch stem, but somehow I did it. After letting the glue dry overnight, I tested the switch, and of course it broke off on the first try. Fine, I'll deal with that another time. I got the back cover put on, taking care not to break any other switches, and reinstalled the screws. Finally, some audio testing. I dropped in the test tape and the battery, plugged in a pair of headphones, pressed play, and got, well, this.
Oh, what?
And that was with the volume wheel turned all the way down. When I turned the volume up, the buzzing got quieter, and maxed out, I finally could hear some of the music. But it was pretty much only in the left channel and didn't sound very good. Also, moving the bass boost switch changed the buzzing, though it stayed the same volume. One might be quick to blame old capacitors, since that now seems to be the catch-all explanation for any old piece of technology that isn't working right. But there's only 2 electrolytic caps on the board, and they're part of the power circuitry, not the audio path. The rest of the caps are all ceramic or tantalum, which don't fail nearly as often, if ever. All of the audio in this player is handled by a single chip, a TA2032AF from Toshiba. It does the preamplification from the tape heads, applies the Dolby noise reduction and bass boost if they're turned on, and ultimately provides the final amplification for the headphone jacks. The volume control is actually wired up between the output side of the Dolby circuitry and the input side of the headphone amp. Basically, the amp is running full blast all the time, and the volume of its output is controlled by changing the volume of its input. Because the buzzing is the loudest when the volume wheel is all the way down, that means the failure is internal to the amp circuitry. In other words, this chip is bad. And sadly, that pretty much dooms this circuit board, if not the entire Walkman. That chip isn't being made anymore, and unless I go down the rabbit hole that is used parts suppliers in China, the only way I'd be able to get another one would be from a different Walkman. I could roll the dice again and buy another parts unit, but there's no telling if that one would be in any better shape. And honestly, at this point, if I'm gonna go to the trouble of buying another Walkman, I'm just gonna save myself the time and aggravation and buy one that's known to work. It's a real bummer. I was hoping that this one would finally be the high-quality daily driver Walkman I've been looking for. But these things happen, and at least I'm only out my time, the cost of the replacement belt, and $12 for the Walkman itself. And I think I finally have my answer as to why it was that cheap to begin with. If you liked the video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. You can follow me on social media at thisdoesnotcomp, and as always, thanks for watching.